Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. So much controversy and a lot of deception. You don't know who's coming through with the light and reflection, and whose mouth is mumbling trick knowledge deceptive. Shabazz break it down with the proper perspective. So
Hotep to the global Africa family. We're here to look beyond the smoke and mirrors, fit the missing puzzle pieces together, and gain a proper perspective on a few things. Now today, we're talking about a dangerous word salad that's been rotting in the underbelly of Black freedom discourse. Now we're going to cut through the technical quibbles to look at the bird's eye view. Because for too long we've been too busy. And when you're this busy studying the feathers, you'll never see the vulture that's circling your head. So let's get into it. I think it is more important we do not quibble, or we stop quibbling over the intricacy and the utilization of terms like slavery versus colonialism or colonization. And instead, we should recognize that in fact the words are technically interchangeable. Or more importantly, they are quite literally two birds on the same wing. I'm sorry, two wings on the same bird. The bird of oppression. Or even better still, they are simply two tentacles on the same octopus. See, this is, or so what I'm saying, this should be a powerful, this should be a clarifying shift in perspective. When we get bogged down in the academic quibble over definitions or the cultural quibble over definitions, we often inadvertently create silos between experiences that are actually fueled by the same engine. So when we see the oppressor as an octopus, for instance, now this is a metaphor that is particularly apt because it illustrates that while the tentacles move differently and grab different things, they are controlled by the same central nervous system. Whether it is the extraction of labor, slavery, or the extraction of land and sovereignty, colonialism, the objective remains the same: the expansion of power and the dehumanization of the quote-unquote other, and that would be us black folks in both hemispheres. So why arguing for, why getting bogged down into the distinction between colonialism and slavery? Here's why it failed. Focusing too heavily on the technical differences can actually obscure the shared mechanics of oppression. We are both oppressed. We have both been oppressed. We both exist in an oppressive state. There is a shared infrastructure. Both systems rely on the same maritime routes, the same banking institutions, the same legal framework to justify the commodification and the dehumanization of human life. The goal is erasure. Now, both systems involve the systematic stripping of language, of culture, and history to make the subject, that would be us, to make the subject more manageable to the state. Now, yes, how complete that systematic stripping goes, how complete that systematic stripping went, again, we can quibble, we can recognize, we can say, well, it was more complete on our side. It was more complete on their side. Okay, I'll give grace within the specific system of slavery in the West. in the West, not just in the United States of America, but in the West. So that would be as far up as Canada, as far down as South America. There may have been more stripping away of language, more stripping away of culture, more stripping away of remembered history. But the erosion occurred in both hemispheres. The mere fact that nearly 0 African countries today have as their official language any of the languages coming from the ethnicities of that country testifies to this erosion, this dual erosion, their stripping of language. Now, I said nearly. Let's have the conversation we need to have. I said nearly. So there's this thing called economic symbiosis. Colonialism provides the raw material, while slavery provides the forced energy to process both. Different limbs, same global economic strategy. So let's go deeper. Let's flesh out this metaphor. The anatomy of the bird. If we use the 2 wings analogy, we see how they work in tandem to keep the system airborne. So you got wing number 1 and wing number 2. Wing number 1 can be slavery, wing number 2 can be colonialism. But what is the focus? Under the slavery wing, the focus is on the ownership of the body. Under the colonialism wing, the focus is on the ownership of the territory. Under the slavery wing, the mechanism is displacement. Under the colonialism wing, the mechanism of this is displacement. Now, yes, slavery displaces the human, takes the person from the land. But under colonialism, you take the land from the person. And the justifications are nearly exact. Under slavery, the justification is biological inferiority. Under colonialism, they decorate their justification by calling it a civilizing mission, manifest destiny. Why? Because of a biological inferiority. All the while, the central body is white supremacy, the ideological core that dictates who is Cuban enough to possess rights and who is merely a resource to be managed. In both hemispheres, there is a relegation, there is a denigration of the people and whatever they naturally wield and yield as an objectified resource to be managed. And in both places, they color up this insistence on managing with divine language. They wrap it inside the divinity of the book that they came with. So, if we choose not to quibble, if we choose to identify the oppressor as a system of tentacles, once you do that, then you are pointing out that cutting off one doesn't kill the beast if the head remains intact. It forces the conversation away from historical semantics and toward the root cause of the current power imbalance. And now some might want to say, hey, you sound like a... Look, we're going to move away from Eurocentric class-based dialectics. I'm not a Marxist, and I'm not espousing Marxism. I am trying to move us toward a perspective that is rooted in African revolutionary thought process. We have to look at systems as a unified predatory organism, because that's what they are. So when you look at thinkers like Kwame Ture, specifically his later work, or if you even go as far back as the philosophy of Maafa, the focus is not on labor value. It is on the disturbance of cosmic and social order. So if we look at the Kemetic concept, Isfet is the word that they use. In ancient Kemet, the antithesis of Ma'at, truth, balance, justice, was in fact Isfet. Now, Isfet is not just evil, although that it is. Isfet is unrestrained chaos. It is injustice. It is falsehood. So from a Kemetic lens, slavery and colonialism are not two different economic theories. They are the dual manifestations of Isfet, the active destruction of the divine order. To fight them, that's not class warfare. And it shouldn't be draped in that Marxist language. To fight them is the restoration of Maafa. Because you aren't just liberating a worker, you are realigning the entire universe. But if you don't like the example, I'll give you another one. Let's look closer. Let's look at what Kwame Nkrumah's unified term, neo-colonialism. Let's look at that, because he said it was the last stage of this oppression. Now, while Nkrumah was influenced by many schools, I'm not going to deny that, his African-centered brilliance was in identifying the systemic totality. He didn't see these things as separate tentacles as much as he saw it as a vortex. So if you want a word that captures this bird's eye view I'm trying to instill in you, Nkrumah used the collective imperialism. He argued that the West operates as a unified bloc to underdevelop all African people. Whether they're using a whip on a plantation, and they did have plantations on the continent, or a debt contract in a colonial office under a certain president, it is a singular consortium of aggression. But we can go further. Let's look at the concept of Maafa. If you want the most pro-black radical term that encompasses the entire octopus without using Marxist jargon, then I would suggest we call what happened on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean the Maafa. Now, okay, this word is derived from the Swahili word for great tragedy or horror, and it was popularized by Nkrumah Ani. The Maafa does not distinguish between the Middle Passage, the plantation, or the Berlin Conference. The Maafa as a term, as a framework, views the last 500 years of all African history as a singular, continuous event of disruption. Now, the white boys, when they look at this in ancient Egypt, they call it the intermediary period. But using the term Maafa, it frames the struggle as an ontological, that which is about being and existence, the ontology, rather than an ideological, that which is about who owns the tool. This is about existentialism, the very living, the very breathing, existence. Now I will go you one further. Dr. Amos Wilson, The Psychology of Self-Annihilation. Dr. Amos Wilson, the giant of black radical thought. Now, he wouldn't quibble over colonialism versus slavery. He used the term the European power meeting. He argued that the name of the tentacle is irrelevant because the function is the same: to create a functional African who serves European interests. A publica, or any other name. So if we compare, let's compare the framework. Again, I'm trying to avoid the Marxist, the Leninist trap, but I understand a lot of us are caught there. So, under the Marxist framework, we say class struggle, proletariat, imperialism, dialectical materialism. And if that at least begins to wake up the mind, that's fine. But we cannot root ourselves in terminology that don't come from ourselves. So I say we have to root ourselves in African-centered radical terminology. The restoration of Ma'at is what we need to be calling this fight, because it brings us both together. If you stay stuck in class struggle, what ends up happening is, well, you in a different class than I'm in, so you got to be against me. No, we're both trying to restore Ma'at, balancing the world against chaos. The global African family, because that is what we are. Our identity is based on a shared destiny, a common enemy, a shared heritage, a shared experience, a shared horror. The Maafa, the total holistic experience of the great disaster. Now, I'll offer you another term. Sankofa consciousness, using the past to build a unified future. So if you choose to describe the octopus in a way that would make Nkrumah, or Ture, or even a Kemetic priest nod in agreement, you would then be describing the Maafa, the systemic imposition of Isfet upon the African world. And so I will say, when we look at this oppressor, we should, okay, I'll do it too. Let's think about Malcolm X. Because I got a quote for you from that brother. Malcolm X said, now, don't come shooting for me if I get the quote wrong. I'm not saying it's the 100% exact framing. But he said something along the lines of, when we're looking at this oppressor, it is the same man. It is the same breaker of dreams. It is the same bloodsucker. It is the same exploiter. It is the same one who has his hand in the pocket of the African, in the pocket of the Asian, in the pocket of the Latin American, and in the pocket of the black man here in America. He is an international bloodsucker. And if you call him a capitalist, you're using the wrong word. He's a bloodsucker. And that was Malcolm X trying to tell you stop quibbling over terminology back in 1964. He's telling you to stop. Stop worrying about the right word. Capitalist, colonizer, enslaver. Recognize the singular predatory nature of the entity and recognize we have to work together in order to bring it down. Even Kwame Ture spoke of it. He spoke on the connection of the ghetto and the colony. That Kwame Ture, many would say, is the architect of the idea that black people in America were internal colonies. He argued that there was no difference between the struggle in Conakry and the struggle in Chicago. Now again, I'll give you a quote. You can look it up. He said something along the lines of, the same people who are exploiting us in the ghettos of the United States are the same people who are exploiting our brothers in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America. We must understand that we are not a minority. We are part of a majority. Our struggle is not a struggle for civil rights, but a struggle for human rights. It is a struggle against a global system of white supremacy that seeks to keep us in a state of perpetual dependency. That was Kwame Ture's speech, The Dialectics of Liberation Congress, 1967. When we still ain't taken. We still fighting over term in 2026. Kwame Ture warned us about the common enemy. He often speaks about how the terminology of slavery, of segregation was used to mask the global infrastructure. keep fighting about American system without entering the global conversation. Now, he said, we have a common enemy. And when you have a common enemy, you have a common struggle. Whether that enemy is in the form of a colonial administrator in Africa or a police officer in the United States, the hand that guides them is the same. It is the hand of international white supremacy. So if we allow these brothers to enter the space, Malcolm X focuses on the extraction, the bloodsucker, who doesn't care if the blood comes from a slave or a colonized subject. Kwame Ture focuses on the geography, which y'all really like to fight over. The hand is the same, though. Whether that hand is in the ghetto, domestic slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, or the colony, imperialism, IMF loans, Trump bartering a deal in the Congo. Both men would tell you that the argument over slavery versus colonization is a distraction from the fact that both are simply tools of the same international vampire or international bloodsucker. So what I would say is, these are my last words. Stop counting the tentacles. The most effective trick of Isfet is to keep us so obsessed with the mechanics of our misery that we never look up to see the face of the miserable one. Whether you are the descendant of the plantation or a survivor of the partition, the boot on your neck is made of the same leather worn by the same beast. Quibbling over slavery versus colonization is like two prisoners arguing over whose cell has the better lock. Meanwhile, the jailer is laughing because as long as you're debating the hardware, you aren't storming the gates. We are living through a singular 500-year Maafa. It is a global project of abstraction, and it requires a global unified response. The vulture doesn't care which wing it uses to fly. It only cares it stays above. It's time we stop looking at the feathers. It's time we stop looking at the feathers and start aiming for the heart of the bird. Now, if you're tired of that dangerous word salad and you're ready for a bird's eye view on the struggle, then you're in the right place. Because we don't just analyze change. We study the iron that forged those changes. So, do me a favor. Subscribe to At the Proper Perspective. Hit the notification bell to stay aligned with my aunt and help us dismantle the global power matrix one truth at a time. Rise up, stay focused, and hopefully we can keep the proper perspective.